Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Wendy Horman. I'm a representative from Bonneville County in Idaho Falls. I am here this morning with Representative Young and likely soon to be, here he is here. He has come downstairs as well, Senator Crabtree, who are the sponsors of this bill. Although I must state, I don't know that I have ever worked on a bill that had more drafts independently flying around. I know of at least 8, and literally dozens of legislators who have contributed to this conversation, and not to mention parents and teachers as well, and students. So I want to acknowledge all of the work by many that have gone into what you see as a very short bill here that affirms Idaho's commitment to dignity and non-discrimination in public schools and our institutions of higher education. You'll notice that's the title of the chapter, Dignity and Non-Discrimination, and that no monies will be used to support discrimination on the basis of race, sex, ethnicity, religion, color, or national origin. It's really that simple. You've heard me share a quote on the House floor that unity and diversity are not opposites. One way we unite is by ensuring a classroom environment where the dignity and beliefs of each and every student is respected. You will notice this bill does not prohibit teaching any particular content. In fact, it reaffirms freedom of inquiry and instruction to teach about the Civil War, the Holocaust, the French Revolution, anything from our history, or chemistry, physics, no prohibitions. One of my children had an incredible military history teacher. And one day I was sitting in our office at home and he was practicing the piano and he abruptly stopped. And he turned to me and he said, "Mom, I just realized Mr. Dyerich isn't a history teacher. He's a future teacher. He's teaching us about history so we can change the future." That classroom was full of honest inquiry and debate in a way that my son understood why he was being taught history, so he could change the future. Paragraph 1 of this bill is simply a restatement of our common ground. It elevates existing state board policy on academic freedom into law and applies it to all classrooms in Idaho. It states that we will respect the dignity of others, acknowledge the right of others to express differing opinions, and foster and defend intellectual honesty, freedom of inquiry and instruction, and freedom of speech and association. Again, this bill reaffirms freedom of belief, inquiry, instruction, speech, and association. Parents are growing increasingly troubled about some of their children's experiences in the classroom and certain curriculum. And we are now facing an extraordinary and rapidly evolving federal takeover of certain curricular aspects of Idaho's local schools. The U.S. Department of Education has published rules stating as much. One sentence reads from the rule, "Schools across the country are working to incorporate anti-racist practices into teaching and learning." Here's the rub. Here's their definition of anti-racist. Any anti-racist idea is any that suggests the racial groups are equals. Does that not fly in the face of the Declaration of Independence that said all men, meaning people, are created equal? Does that not fly in the face of Martin Luther King's dream that his 4 little children would one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character? As someone who has spent 20 years in elected office, working to improve educational opportunities for our children, this federal rule is deeply troubling to me. I am a firm advocate of retaining state and local control of our schools. The 10th Amendment of the Bill of Rights is clear that any powers not delegated to the United States are reserved to the states and to the people. This bill is Idaho's statement that we will not tolerate discrimination, and we are reserving education policy and curricular choices to the state and local institutions and schools.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Lane Mackner. I'm the president of the Idaho Education Association, and I'm here to testify that House Bill 377 is not necessary. Idaho educators are expected to abide by the Professional Standards Commission's Code of Ethics, and you can rest assured that our teachers conduct themselves with the highest integrity. The debate and allegations of indoctrinating students by Idaho educators are baseless and downright insulting. In fact, during this session, policymakers have done very little to recognize the work all school employees have done this difficult year, from kitchen and maintenance staff to teacher aides and certified instructors. Idaho schools have done the very best they could with limited resources at the ready. While some members in this body jockey to diminish the public's trust in our institution of public education, teachers who have moved mountains during this global pandemic are still waiting to see the additional compensation that the legislature promised them last year. Throughout the discussion on House Bill 354, lawmakers often started their debate with, "I love our teachers, but," and then followed up with insulting rhetoric fit for a dystopian novel. The doublespeak has not gone unnoticed. As an educator myself, I expect to be given the pedagogical freedom in my classroom to introduce students to competing ideas, facilitate tough conversations, and equip students with the tools they need to think critically about the world around them. The Code of Ethics compels me to believe in the worth and dignity of each human being, to recognize the supreme importance of pursuing truth, striving towards excellence, nurturing democratic citizenship, and safeguarding the freedom to learn and teach while guaranteeing equal educational opportunities for all. And while some of you here refer to or believe that our public schools are government-run indoctrination camps, I still believe they are the great equalizer and place where students, regardless of zip code, should be afforded a shot at a life of promise. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
Sure. Members of the committee, my name is Dele Ogunranola, and I'm a resident in District 3 and testifying in opposition to House Bill 377. As a current graduate of Boise State University and a product of the Idaho public education system from my 4th grade year, House Bill 377 is a horrifying and egregious slap in the face of the good work teachers and educators do every day. My 3 principal concerns with this bill are that it implicates the First Amendment and its entirely too expansive and incorrect interpretation of critical race theory, and finally, the inevitable effect it will have on critical conversations about systemic racism in the classroom. The First Amendment right afforded to all in this country applies just as clearly to the everyday person as it does to educators in our public education system. This bill would make it a procedural nightmare to educate the youth of our generation with correct tools that are guaranteed by the First Amendment in this country. Subsection 1 of this bill promises the expression of differing opinions and to foster and defend intellectual honesty. Well, I ask how you can claim to foster and defend intellectual honesty and freedom of instruction if you expressly limit the freedom to instruct. My second grievance comes from the expansive and incorrect interpretation of what is and is not critical race theory. Critical race theory is the foundational concern for the Idaho legislature in promotion of this bill and the understanding that it is so flawed. It speaks and lends further credence to why it is necessary to engage in this dialogue in the first place. Would you censor philosophy for critiquing the existential crisis of humanity? Would you ban the economy professors from critiquing the history and growth of what is and this country came from? Understanding that the growth and expansion of knowledge and concepts like critical race theory have led to the empowerment and intellectual contextualization for Black people just like me is a huge missing piece of this puzzle. Finally, my strongest issue with 377 is the inevitable censorship that will arise as a result. The House wants you to believe that the revision to direct or otherwise compel, rather than the express prohibition that has been present in previous iterations, addresses the problem of censorship, and I assure you it does not. Literature instruction is dependent on learning and discovery of historical truths, whether they be ugly or not. Students like me, students who are Black or brown, depend on this education, and I urge you to do nothing but vote in opposition to House Bill 377. Thank you, Mr. Chair and the committee.
I appreciate the discussion. I do want to say that the accusation that the legislature has done very little to support teachers defies our actions. We have a $2.2 billion budget awaiting approval And they are waiting in JFAC for me now to approve another $430 million in ARPA. That makes $870 million in total. Also, it was the governor's K-12 council that recommended freezing the career ladder, not the legislature. By January, the governor also recommended not freezing the career ladder, and you will find the bill that is waiting for us to vote on includes 2 years worth of career ladder funding to come in the next year. So we are honoring the commitment that we have made to fully fund our teachers' salaries. And once we get policy in place that makes sure professional development and other aspects of curriculum cannot be used for discriminatory purposes. I would like to repeat what I said at the beginning. This bill does not prohibit teaching about white supremacy, sexism, racism, communism, or any other ism. In fact, the good, the bad, and the ugly are all on the table to be taught. No portion of this bill promotes censorship or suppresses discourse. What it does is elevate policy into law that prohibits it. Let me read it to you again. Respect the dignity of others, acknowledge the right of others to express differing opinions, and foster and defend intellectual honesty, freedom of inquiry and instruction, and freedom of speech and association. Again, we are elevating those values from policy into law. And we are saying that no student may be compelled to personally affirm, adopt, or adhere to these principles that are stated back in Section 3A, that any sex, race, ethnicity, religion, color, or national origin is inherently superior or inferior. They cannot be compelled to believe that. You can read the rest of 2 and 3 there. I would argue this bill is necessary, and I would argue that the federal government is declining to enforce provisions of the Civil Rights Act that have been referenced, which is part of what makes this bill necessary. It does restate the First Amendment, and I would argue that if points are being taught that are discriminatory, then that would not be allowed. That's what this bill is trying to say. Again, no portion of this bill prohibits teaching about difficult subjects or conducting discussions on difficult subjects. I think, as a political science major, I think John Stuart Mills would agree that we are encouraging the free flow of ideas with this bill. I want to state that, again, unity and diversity are not opposites. What we are after is that beautiful blending of bringing diverse viewpoints together, allowing the free flow of ideas, promoting the free flow of ideas, which creates dignity and non-discriminatory classrooms. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to go back up to JFAC to vote on getting that money out to our public schools. Thank you.
I was about ready to shoo you out of here.
I'm on my way.
Take care of that.
A question.
Yes.
My question is, with the stakeholders you had at the table, was there any conversation about how this will roll out as far as getting everybody on the same page about what do we mean? What is the intent, and how do we get a common understanding of what we're trying to do here?
Okay, Representative Horman or Young?
Chairman Cloud, Representative Yamamoto, as former president of the Idaho School Boards Association, I'm very familiar with their process of developing model policy. I cannot speak for them, whether they will intend to develop model policy, but as with any law that we pass in the state of Idaho, there are post-legislative meetings that are held by the State Department of Education. I'm not sure if the State Board of Education holds those meetings, but I know IASA, ISBA, IEA, they all hold their own conferences to talk and discuss about all legislation that is passed, and I expect they will include this legislation in those conversations.
Follow-up, Chairman?
Yeah, Representative Yamamoto.
So the follow-up question would be, how would we, as a legislative body, make sure that our intent that would allay the fears, how would we make sure that that becomes part of that model language or those conversations? Thank you.
Yeah, Representative Horman.
Chairman Cloud, Representative Yamamoto, perhaps they will invite you or I to participate in those conversations, or any other legislator in this. Hopefully they will read the bill that plainly states, respect the dignity of others, acknowledge the right of others to express differing opinions, and foster and defend intellectual honesty, freedom of inquiry and instruction, freedom of speech and association, and include that as part of whatever presentation or policies they may develop.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any. I have one question that I'd like to ask to make sure that we kind of get this on the record. It's been brought up that the question about debate teams, that you have a student, and the traditional situation with a debate team is that they're challenged to be prepared for either side of a debate. Can you kind of make a statement that I would like to put on the record for the history of this bill, that we're not intending to avoid a student to be, quote, compelled, because the personal situation is we're not compelling anybody in debate, but that they would be allowed to have a debate situation, say take both sides of it, be prepared for both sides. And that, by the way, you just found out that you're going to debate the pro and not the con. Could you address that, or maybe Representative Young?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. As the mother of a now lawyer who competed at the national level in Crossfire and went undefeated her first day, she has been a tremendous example to me, frankly, who came to this job terrified of public speaking. Be that as it may, that is absolutely allowable under this bill, in the same way that a teacher is allowed to debate and present various viewpoints about, again, any other ism that you want to insert. The line is where you would compel a student to personally affirm, adopt, or adhere to any of these. Again, to force a student against their own will or beliefs to adhere to those. But absolutely, debate is allowed and encouraged under this bill, Mr. Chairman.